The Benjamin Dixon Show is only possible with listener support. Go to www.thebenjamindixonshow.com to register for our blog and join the Progressive Army. And now, ladies and gentlemen,
we are now about to witness the truth.
It's the Benjamin Dixon Show.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome, one and all, to the Benjamin Dixon Show. It is Thursday, February 23rd, 2017. Thanks so much for joining us. As always, I'd like to start the show by thanking our supporters, our patrons, without whom we could not do this. Not only our patrons and our supporters, but also all of you who like, share, subscribe, watch live, leave comments, everything that you do. We really appreciate it. We have a jam-packed show tonight, and so I want to jump right in. We will hold phone calls until about 9:30 Eastern time. So in about half an hour, we'll open up the phone lines. We'll have an interview with another Progressive Army author discussing protest and the criminalization of protest. That'll be coming up at around 9:20. But first, what's happening in the news? Private prisons are back. As we know, President Obama and the Obama administration, on their way out the door, they made headway in diminishing or decreasing the amount that the federal government depends on private prisons. In fact, they were trying to phase it out over about a 10-year period. It was not going to be an immediate action. It was going to take about a decade for the federal prison industry, for lack of a better phrase, to phase out the usage of private for-profit prisons. And we've talked quite a bit about the abdication of power of the government's duty to outsource one of their primary fundamental tasks as a government to for-profit corporations. And we've discussed when you add the profit motive into prison systems, then you have the situation where you find in Pennsylvania where there was a judge who was getting kickbacks for sending juveniles to the private prison industry. And you also have the requirement in many of these contracts for the government to keep these beds full. In other words, if they don't have people in these beds, they still have to pay these private prison companies. And what does that in turn cause? That causes a massive crackdown, because if the government is going to spend money to have a prisoner there, even if the prisoner is not there, the government is going to go out and find bodies to put there. In every way imaginable, for-profit prisons are not only a dereliction of duty, an abdication of duty, but to say it's detrimental is not hyperbolic enough. But we have turned back now with the Trump administration. We've turned back from this very modest move by the Obama administration, which was not, again, what the Obama administration did was not some type of salvific, life-changing, statement against private prisons. It simply said, we're going to phase it out over 10 years. Well, for Jeff Sessions, who is now the Attorney General, and the Trump administration, that is not good enough. The Justice Department signaled today, according to the New York Times, that the federal government would reverse the Obama-era decision to stop using private prisons. Jeff Sessions issued a memo placing one issued last statement. He issued. Oh my God, what the hell is wrong with my mouth today? He issued a memo overturning Sally Yates' last memo that she issued in August. And Sessions said that Yates' directive went against longstanding Justice Department policy and practice and, quote, impaired the Bureau's ability to meet the future needs of the federal correctional system. In other words, he's trying, of course, any move can be caped in nice, flowery language to make it seem like you're trying to do what's in the best interest of the American people. In actuality, he's going to guarantee that these contracts for-profit prison companies continue in perpetuity. So when we talk about the private prison industry on the federal level, we're not talking about a large percentage of what the private prison industry does. The private prison industry is actually sustained mostly by the states. And on the federal level, private prisons hold about 22,000 inmates, and that's only about 12% of the total population. And in many of the cases, these federal prison inmates, those facilities are used for foreign nationals who are being detained on immigration offenses. The prison population in general has been decreasing as changes to sentencing laws were taking place underneath the Obama administration. But there's a good chance that that's going to end too. There's a good chance that because we're moving into the Trump administration, the Trump era, where he is citing an increase in crime in the face of the reality that there has been a decrease. He's citing an uptick in murders when, in fact, there has been a decrease. And he has been touting the entire time that he's going to bring law and order back, even floating the idea of a national federalized stop and frisk program. And so where sentences and prison sentences have been decreasing over time, there's a good chance that the Trump administration and their draconian policies will cause an uptick. According to Trump, in an interview with MSNBC last year, he said, quote, "I do think we can do a lot of privatizations and private prisons. It seems to work a lot better." And there's no substantive evidence to suggest that that's actually a true statement. This is obviously just another one of Donald Trump's alternative facts that he floats out there, and people take it. The people who support him take it as though it's gold. We're getting ready to go into the biggest era of crackdown on some actual crime, right? It would be, no one is saying that there's not crime, but we're also going to see a crackdown on the non-existing crimes. We're non-violent offenders, people getting arrested and spending an enormous amount of time in jail over drugs. The war on drugs, part 2. Not because we actually have this, set aside the heroin, the opioid epidemic, which in many cases, the people with opioid addictions and the overdose problem that we have, most states are starting to have programs or instituting programs to actually help them and not criminalize them. So I'm curious, as Donald Trump gets ready to go into this new era of law and order, whether or not he's going to continue the trend of not criminalizing, and that's not the appropriate phrase, because opioids are, you can be arrested, but there is the focus and the sentiment of the culture around heroin today that seeks treatment of people versus imprisonment. And I'm curious if Donald Trump is going to continue on that route, or is he going to crack down on opioid abusers? And the reason I make that distinction is because we've had historical crackdowns on drugs that disproportionately affect the black community, and even on drugs that are used overwhelmingly by everyone equally, but a laser-like focus on the black community. For instance, weed, marijuana, which takes us to the second half of this story. In light of Jeff Sessions' resurgence in the usage of private prisons, for-profit prisons, and the Justice Department's rolling back of the Obama era decline or decision to no longer use private prisons. Now we're in this era where they want private prisons. And as we stated, private prisons require that beds are full. And we're in this era of this crackdown on crime and law and order. Simultaneously, Donald Trump And the Jeff Sessions administration, I guess we can call it that, Jeff Sessions and Donald Trump, they're getting ready to crack down on marijuana users and on states that are going to that have legalized marijuana. In a press conference today, Sean Spicer told reporters that the Justice Department will step up enforcement of federal laws against states' marijuana legalization. He said, quote, "I do believe you'll see greater enforcement of it." He didn't offer any details of what this is actually going to look like. He did not offer any information into their justification, except to say, quote, "That's very different than in making a distinction between medical marijuana and recreational use." Spicer said, quote, "That's very different than recreational use, which is something the Department of Justice will be further looking into." So what's interesting about this, though, is that states are making this decision, state by state by state. This is legit. The legalization of marijuana is legitimately an issue that is organic, no pun intended, and going state by state by state. And no state is trying to enforce them. Not only are they not, they can't enforce their decision on another state. So in terms of states' rights, the federal government is saying, no, we don't care what the state has decided. We are going to crack down on this because of federal law. Now, of course, federal law is supreme in the land, but for people who constantly tout the importance of states' rights, here's a perfect example of them not really caring at all whatsoever about the states' rights, about this issue on the state level, because they feel like this is something they have to crack down on. Particularly Jeff Sessions, who has historically had a problem with marijuana users and the vilification and the criminalization of people who use marijuana, even to the extent where he was quoted as saying that he thought the KKK, he thought that they were okay until he found out that they were marijuana users. Compared to the Obama administration in 2013, they stated the president's policy towards legalization would be not to intervene so long as they contained the dealing of marijuana within state boundaries. In other words, if the dealing and the selling of marijuana became an interstate issue, then of course it is something that's directly connected to the federal government or falls directly underneath the purview of the federal government. This just shows you the glaring hypocrisy of conservatives. Because you think about their desire. It just reminds me of the insurance issue and how they want so desperately for insurance companies to be able to handle or to have policies that cross boundaries, state boundaries. And this is something that they've been advocating for forever. And now here President Obama is saying, here's a perfect example of when the federal government can stay out of something, allow the state to have their own prerogative, so long as it does not become interstate commerce, then there's nothing that the federal government needs to be involved in. So on one issue, and on many of issues, the insurance issue is just one out of a dozen that we could think of right off the top of our heads. It's one issue where the Republican Party, the GOP, they want so desperately for issues that are inside of their ideological worldview to be imposed on the state level, completely erasing states' rights. And then on other issues, they were like, oh, well, you know, we want the government to stay out of it, even though it involves interstate commerce. And so here we are. And in context of the previous story, when we're talking about the Trump administration and the Justice Department underneath Jeff Sessions signaling again that they want to they're going to keep their contracts with the private industry, the private prison industry. This lets you know who they're getting ready to target. Both of these came down today. They're getting ready to target people who smoke weed and sell weed. Nonviolent offenders. This is what they want. and they want to fill up, because if Massachusetts, for example, is not going to if Massachusetts is not going to prosecute or imprison someone over marijuana, then what are they going to do? They're going to have to get they're going to have to use federal law, federal courts, federal convictions, and federal prisons. Right back full circle to the private prisons. So it's both an ideological assault on individual rights, it's an ideological assault on states' rights, but it's also a giveaway to their buddies in the private prison industry complex. And here we are with a complete reversal of a trend towards progress, because, I mean, we're talking about weed. We're not talking about heroin. We're not talking about opioids that cause physical addictions and cause how many overdoses and how many deaths every year. And so I pose the same question at the end as I did in the beginning. Is Donald Trump and the Jeff Sessions onslaught against drug use going to include the same type of intensity against opioid abusers as they have signaled that they're going to crack down on weed, on marijuana? Are they going to be just as intense on A as they have signaled that they're going to be on B? Because of the sympathy, because of the and rightfully so, right? I'm not against state by state instituting programs to help people with heroin addictions, to help them, to prevent them from having overdoses, and to help them get over their addictions, and instead of putting them in prison, trying to help them. That's what we should do. But the question is, what is the Trump administration really going to do? Because as with everything else, there's clearly, in this story, there's an underlying race component where we're going to see a serious crackdown, or the implications, rather, of this crackdown are very likely to be felt the hardest by Black and brown communities. All right, in other news. So we've been talking about the transgender bathroom, and I hate to minimize it and just say it's a bathroom issue, because it's not. It's much more than that. It's just a basic human rights issue, and it's an issue that really is about the otherification of humans, and it's also an issue that intersects with religious zealotry and religious bigotry and the fear of people that you don't approve of, religiously speaking. And we've talked about this week, the Trump administration has rolled back some general guidelines and guidance that the Obama administration left for schools, school districts, states, and he has made it so on a school by school basis. He's made it so that these decisions can be made on a school by school basis. So you quite literally can go to one school in one city in the same school district, and that school can have totally different rules than another school, which allows for, and this is exactly, I'm sorry, just like this story just fosters so many thoughts, particularly when we just got through discussing the intrusion of the federal government on the state level with regard to marijuana, because they don't care about states' rights in that example. But now here's a perfect example where they're saying, oh, this is something that we want to leave up to the states, and this is something that we want to leave up to the local schools. So in one example, they're all about states' rights. And then in another example, they're completely forgetting, don't even care about states' rights. And it's always falling on the side of what is in their ideological, what's in their ideology, right? So for them to leave the transgender community vulnerable to bullies on the state level falls perfectly in their religious zealotry ideological worldview. and for them to say, well, now we don't want the state to, we don't care what the states say, and we're going to impose these marijuana restrictions on these states, also falls perfectly in their religious zealot worldview. So here on the transgender issue, they are saying that because this is a local issue, this is something that everyone, we should leave to the states. They are now leaving children who are already fighting probably the biggest fights that they would have to fight in their life. And that is to accept themselves in the middle of being in the worst environment imaginable, to be different or to not be quote unquote normal. School. It's just, and before I even go through this story, can you imagine what type of twisted person you have to be to feel like your religious campaign has to be executed on the backs of children who are already going through more in their teen and their middle school years than these people making the decisions have ever had to go through in their life? These people are cowards. These politicians are cowards. They could not survive half a day living in the ridicule and the scorn and the idea or the sensation or the feeling that no one cares about you, no one loves you. Not only do they not care about you and they don't love you, but they're hostile towards you because of your sexual orientation in some cases and your gender identification in others. These politicians who feel righteous because of this, you are cowards, spineless cowards who are not strong enough to live a day in the life of a transgender student, whom now you've thrown at the mercy of bigots on the state level. Thankfully, and I use this word very carefully, thankfully, because it's not set in stone yet, but a lot of the laws that are passing across the land that are targeting transgender students, because ultimately this is who is going to target the most, they are floundering, according to an article in Fox News, surprisingly enough, because of the backlash that North Carolina felt. The economic backlash, the boycotts, the NBA pulling out of North Carolina for the All-Star game, I believe in 2016, with the boycotts from different cities and states saying that they were no longer going to do business with North Carolina. A lot of bills that match what North Carolina was trying to do are not getting the traction that they need to actually pass on a state-by-state level. In Arkansas, Asa Hutchinson said, who is the Republican governor, said that they don't need this law in Arkansas. And she said, quote, if there's a North Carolina type bill, then I want the legislature not to pass it. In Texas, we see some of the same thing. Republican Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick, who founded the state Tea Party, is coming out basically to kill it. In Virginia, South Dakota, and Wyoming, some of the same things. And so I still use this phrase very, very carefully to say that this is a good thing because it's not a thing yet. It's just something that's being signaled on a state-by-state level because of the backlash that North Carolina suffered. It still remains to be seen if this is the case. And actually, I think I spoke incorrectly. It's not that Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick of Texas came out against it. It's actually he came out in favor of it, but he's facing serious backlash. So in the midst of this onslaught, and again, the thing I can't get over the most is that this is considered to be a crusade by Christian politicians, and it's a crusade against predominantly children. I hope they feel I hope they feel as insignificant and cowardly as they are. I hope that when they go home and they look in the mirror that they are as insecure and cowardly and broken by the disgusting person that they are. When they look in the mirror, I hope they look in the mirror and question their own existence, because they feel like the way for them to carry out their crusade is to do it on the backs of children who are in the most tumultuous time of their life. I was reading some statistics where they say a third of transgender students refuse to eat at school, and they refuse to drink at school because they want to avoid even having to use the bathroom throughout the school day. I want you to think about that stuff. Think about that. They are so terrified of having to use the bathroom that they would rather not eat or drink throughout the day. And in the midst of this, you have people who are free to be anything they are. They want to be there. They have no problems because they are straight. They have no problems because they're not transgender. They have nothing to worry about in the day except for what type of clothes they wear and whether they're popular or not. And their parents are the same way. They have nothing to worry about, but they're looking at this most marginalized group of Americans and feel as though their crusade should be waged against them. And they feel like, and I was reading on Twitter today where people are like, they feel it's weird. It's weird or American society is trying to make it weird for you to be heterosexual and cisgender. Like that's like you having to be in the presence of a person that's LGBTQ is an affront to your existence, when all you've got to do is just keep walking and nothing changes for you at all. In the meanwhile, you have students who are too terrified of using the restroom, too afraid to go to the bathroom, so much so that they avoid eating and drinking during the day. At some point, you've got to you have to confront your own bigotry. You have to look at yourself. And I'm not talking about those people who are lost and we'll never get them. We'll never be able to reach the religious zealots. We'll never be able to reach those that protest, thou dost protest too much. Those who focus so much on the LGBTQ community, probably because they have something inside of them that they're afraid that if they authorize the rights of the LGBTQ or they condone the rights of the LGBTQ community, somehow it's going to make them gay. At some point, you've got to grow the hell up and realize that people just want to be able to exist and exist in public without having to hide or having to live underneath the condescending, vengeful, and wrathful religious gaze of religious bigots. The Constitution says that they should be able to do that. But apparently, we've got to keep fighting to remind or to inform these people that the Constitution is for more than just straight, white Christian men. All right. Sorry, I got a little carried away there. We're supposed to start the interview with Pamela Elaine from Progressive Army about 10 minutes ago. But that last issue was very, very important. And it's something we have to, it's important because it's important to me. It's important to me because I've been on both sides. I come from a religious background. I come from a religious background that kind of instills this fear of the LGBTQ community. And I know how easy it is to get stuck there in that fear and never confront yourself. But at some point, you got to grow up. You got to grow up and realize that nobody has to live according to your religious dogma. Nobody should have to be subjected to forced to live a marginalized life just because you're uncomfortable with their existence. I never forget. I never forget the one time I probably should have been fired as a teacher was when my class, not even my entire class, but a student in particular, started to verbally harass a gay student in our classroom, and it just, I don't know, something snapped in me because here this kid doesn't bother anybody, doesn't do anything but does his work, doesn't get into confrontation, and then you have this other guy who doesn't do anything but bother people, and he chooses to pick on the most helpless, vulnerable, marginalized person in the room to make himself feel like he was a man. I don't know what the hell I didn't say to that kid. I know I threw something at him. I know that for sure. But it just shows you that people have no problem exercising or stretching their desire to feel like a man on the back of the weakest, and not even the weakest, but the most marginalized. The people who are the most vulnerable, people who are in the weakest position in our society. That's what I was trying to say. People who are in the most vulnerable position in our society. And you have people who are abusers, oppressors, who instead of fighting someone their own size, rhetorically speaking, they would rather fight and exercise. And this is what our government is doing. Our government is stretching their religious zealot legs. And they're stretching their ideology, and they're stretching their influence. They're doing it on the backs of the most marginalized in our society. And that should piss all of us off. All right, I'm joined by Pamela Elaine of the Progressive Army. And thank you, Pamela, for your patience. I know I'm about 15 minutes. Yeah, a good 15 minutes late. Thanks for joining me to discuss your article. How are you today?
I'm doing okay. Thanks for having me on, Ben.
My pleasure. My pleasure. I wanted to talk to you because your article, your most recent article, has some very important points that I think that people should hear, as well as go and read. Go to theprogressivearmy.com and read this article. It's about the ever increasing criminalization of protest. Tell us a little bit about what you wrote and some of your key points.
Well, the situation that happens is as we watch these protests going on, one of my Twitter followers mentioned to me that this was sort of a setup to keep us preoccupied while there's other things going on behind the scenes. So as we protest, and you get a lot of news coverage for that, which is great. People are out there, getting their voices heard. But I was starting to see these little laws come up in different states where they're pretty much criminalizing protests, and they're changing the terminology used to describe a riot. They are enacting laws that give the police more protections in dealing with the public. And as we all know, that when you start dealing with the police, they show up for certain protests in riot gear, like we saw today out in North Dakota with the water protectors. So as these laws come up, it gives less and less power to the people to be able to be heard, because protesting is pretty much the last salvation we have to be heard individually, because we see that the voting process is slanted against us. We see that you've got to kind of juggle what media you can trust and when, and it just becomes this knot of the going to the courts and not knowing who's actually there for you, listening to the duopoly we have with the with the different political factions. And it's just scary to see how much they're changing this, but it's very kind of on the down low. It's very low key.
Yeah, I noticed in some cases they, and actually, no, I just saw this today, and I think this came out after you wrote your article, that they are going to start allowing the seizure of property of protesters, even if it started off as a peaceful protest and then turned violent. They're doing these very subtle things that really can go unnoticed, that when you add them up all together, it is the criminalization of protest, one of our fundamental rights as American citizens. What are some of the most disturbing things that you've seen? What are the things that have stood out the most to you that says this is a red flag that people need to be aware of and concerned about?
Well, I think two things happened that kind of jarred me, and it was one of them was in, I think it was Louisiana, where they passed the law where resisting arrest would be considered a felony now. It's a hate crime and a felony. And then you had the reporters who were arrested while they were documenting the violent protests at the inauguration. They were arrested within, just with the rioters. And you see that attack on the press. And I think that's where we sort of focused, was that it was an attack on freedom of the press. But when you think about it in totality, you get this picture where if you're involved in a protest, if you resist arrest, which could be a sit-in.
Right.
If you don't let the cops arrest you readily, or if they yank on you and you pull back, now you're being aggressive, and now they can up the charge to a felony. And then we have this rat back program that the FBI is running, and what it does is it allows them to keep the information that they track on people and provide it to employers. So if you join the program and you want to see what Sarah did over the weekend, if she was involved in the protest, she may have done nothing more than sit there, but now she's charged with a felony, and you lose your job for just voicing your opinion and making a stand. So it was kind of a line of action that, though these things are in different states, it's happening so quietly. When will Louisiana pick up one of the other laws? And I think they were criminalizing that they were forcing kids out of college if they were involved in a riot, but they changed the definition of riot so that that would encompass more people.
Right.
And that there's this attack because, colleges are the liberal bastion where they go to, where we, brainwash all the children
Right.
to liberal ideology. And so when you look at that in linear and see what could happen, it gets very scary.
And here, the thing about it is, here's the truth is that a lot of these laws are going to end up being, or could and should end up being, deemed unconstitutional. But the problem is twofold. One, it's going to require someone to get arrested and charged and possibly even sentenced underneath these. Actually, I believe all the way to sentencing underneath one of these laws, which means that individual's life has been ruined. And then it's going to require a long appeal process that will go all the way to the Supreme Court, which means that there's going to be a long gap between the time these laws are instituted and executed and the time that it even gets to the Supreme Court. Problem two is Donald Trump is getting to make up the makeup of the Supreme Court, and he's getting to put people on there who, if they are more ideological than they are adherents to the Constitution, could just as easily say these laws are constitutional. So, even though we have a recourse and the ACLU can get involved because we've given them millions of dollars over the last couple of weeks, it's still a possibility that there's nothing that we could do in these scenarios. What was your conclusion? What are your lasting thoughts from this article that you wrote?
Well, and I was going back to what you said at the beginning of the show with the prison pipeline. That definitely feels like where we're going, because if they need to fill those beds, the incentive to keep arresting people, and then we also have this trend to where, if you follow the Justice Project, where people who are low income and are sort of forced to confess to lower crime so that they can get off, but then they end up going to jail for 2 years instead of 10, but now you still have a record.
Right.
And so that's where I kind of see them filling those beds, making more things illegal, while they're also on the flip side making sure that everything is sort of geared for them to come out on top. I mean, it's just the same game. I mean,
yeah.
You hear the Hitler thing so much for the past 15, 20 years that it kind of becomes numbing. But when you look at what's actually going on now, it seems to fit.
It's definitely an onslaught against our liberties, our constitutional rights, and it is definitely a step towards authoritarianism, and that's not hyperbole, right? I know a lot of people say, oh, the comparison to Hitler is over the top, but at a minimum, you can't look at this and not see that this is a step towards authoritarianism, right-leaning authoritarianism, and fascism most certainly falls in the category of right-leaning authoritarianism. Pamela, thanks so much for joining me. Tell everyone how to get up with you.
Well, you can follow me on Twitter at Goddess Pamela. Some people apparently love that on some of our comments on my article. And you can usually find me on Facebook.
All right. Thanks so much for
Pamela Elaine.
Pamela Elaine on Facebook. Pamela, thanks so much. Everyone go over there and check out that article so that you can read what's going on and make sure that you're aware of what's going on with the criminalization, the encroaching criminalization of protest. All right. The phone lines will be open, 857-600-0518. I know we've said a lot, and I want to get your input and your feedback. So dial in to join the conversation. While you dial in, I want to deal with something a little less it is important, but it's less serious than everything else we've talked about. Little Marco Rubio, aptly named by the president, President Trump, has been found. We were concerned. There was some concern about whether or not he was okay. They even had, if I'm not mistaken, they had milk cartons. They had milk cartons out looking for Marco. Let me put it on the screen. Missing Senator Marco Rubio, a.k.a. Little Marco, afraid of constituents with tough questions. Treat gently. Well, Marco has been found and he is safe. And we have video footage of the senator whose senatorial office said that he was in Germany, in Europe. But turns out that's not the case. So let's take a look at this confrontation that happened today with little Marco Rubio.
Senator, I thought you were in Europe. What? I thought you were in Europe. I saw these missing child posters all over town. Are you going to host a town hall? I'm glad you're okay. But are you going to host a town hall? There's a constituent town hall today. We need to hear from you, Senator.
I'm glad you're okay.
Senator, we need to hear from you, your constituents. Are you going to host a town hall? Senator.
All right, that's video one. And so he actually did not show up to the town hall, which happened today. He didn't show up to the town hall, but he did show up to a speaking engagement. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, this next video is from FIU, Florida International University, where other constituents caught up with them. And I want you to listen to what he says when he's asked, why don't you host a town hall? It's really subtle, really quiet, but hopefully you can hear it. If not, I will let you know what he said. Here we go.
Hi, Senator. Hey, man, what's up? Hold on, just wanted to give you the check.
Oh, I just saw this guy at Jackson.
Yeah, that's right. They just wanted to give you a check.
Do me a favor. Be respectful.
No, I am. But are you going to do a town hall for us to hear your people?
Not because town halls, people get rude and stupid on both sides.
But you hear the people.
I've heard the people, man. Listen, I ran for office. Let them tape it. I ran for office. I told everybody I was against Obamacare. I told everybody that I was in favor of the things I was in favor of. I'm going to do what I told people I was going to do. How unfair would it be to the people that voted for me to now change my opinion and vote like the guy I see? Senator, you said you were in Europe. You said you were in Europe, Senator.
It's about representing Florida.
Oh, but I'm here every day. Look, let me tell you something. You guys,
all the people that are affected by all the insurance laws that we have. I agree. We have like 96,600 just in Dade County alone, even more. Millions over Florida. And you should be representing your people.
But I do. But the problem is that what we have now isn't working for them either because their premiums are too high.
No, they're not.
All right. So if you didn't hear it at the beginning, when he was asked, why don't you host a town hall? He said, because people get stupid and rude. His constituents. Now, ultimately, the problem is he just got reelected, so he's got 6 years not to really be concerned about his constituents again, because that's how politicians operate. But realistically, the question is, how much pressure can his constituents actually place on him over the next 6 years? I mean, we're talking about a long game here. And I just want to pull up one tweet from someone who voted for him. And she said, Lindsay O'Neill on Twitter, she said, Rubio's office lied to me today at 2:15 and insisted that he was in Germany. And actually, that's not the tweet I was looking for, so I pulled up the wrong tweet. But there was another tweet by someone in that same thread that said that they voted for Marco, and they still expected him to be at the town hall. So while he's using this excuse that, he's already, he's been elected and he's doing what he promised everyone he was going to do, the people that he voted for him to do what he promised he was going to do still want to hear from him. And instead of having a town hall, he says that he was in Germany. It's possible. It's possible that he was in Germany early this morning or in a flight and got back. That's possible. But the fact of the matter is he's still not hosting a town hall, just like many other senators, many other congressmen, people who are too cowardly to face their constituents who want to ask them the tough questions. All right, let's get this caller. Caller, you're live on the air. What is your name, comment, and or question?
This is Umar from Brooklyn.
Umar, what's going on, man? What's on your mind?
Wow, I'm like, I actually made an attempt to go to the Resist thing at Yvette Clark's in Brooklyn. Mm-hmm. But, it's like, I don't know. I just feel like there's a too late factor in it. So I just slumped off home because I'm like, this doesn't seem to be getting anywhere. Because what I'm feeling is like, it's hard not to be hyperbolic in this situation because it's amazing, especially since all the hyperbole's been used since the 2000s began.
Yeah.
Oh, he's like Hitler. Oh, this is like Nazi Germany. But for God's sake, people, there's a good book. It's long, but it's good because what it does, it charts the rise and fall of the Third Reich. Mm-hmm. Very first thing that the Nazis did was to go after the opposing thought, what they call the socialists, which I guess they were socialists. Then they attacked the press, and like Russia did, and squeezed the press into being more of a pro-party thing. Mm-hmm. Meanwhile, the politicians at the time saw their rise and said, okay, we'll give them an office, which pretty much got Hitler into power. This is exactly what happened. We'll cooperate. And I can't help it, but this is what I see happening. Now, when people say, okay, we got this Republicans, we got Trump, everybody, they're in control right now. There's so little we can do but. And I'm saying there is no but. It's everything that can be done at this point. Yeah. And the major thing that I want to advocate is, except for the Democrats, because I think everything said about them is legitimate, but the grievances between all progressive people, be it ACORN, be it feminists, be it Black Lives Matter, it's got to drop. Because the other thing that we can do is become a unified field. Mm. Because, remember, I was watching, what's that comedian's name who's on TYT, but it does its own thing. What is his name with the glasses?
Jimmy Dore. Jimmy
Dore showed that a bunch of middle-aged and elderly, let's say it, white folks went and shut down a pipeline. Mm-hmm. And the interesting thing was they did it and they spoke out and they said clearly, because we're not going to get the same thing a minority or a brown person would get. That we know we're not. Mm-hmm. But that's about to change. And if we don't seriously come together, if Chicago, if Trump sends those National Guards into Chicago, I really think the test case is DAPL. But no one's really, it's not a major city. I'm not trying to downplay the importance of it. Right. But Chicago is going to be like the test case. Mm. When that happens, that's it. And then the person who keeps this Joseph Balin, who keeps coming on here, I think he should chill out on what he's typing. But, the problem is there's parts of what he's saying I can't necessarily disagree with him. They're coming they're not here. They're here, but they're still coming because like it or not, what people are noticing, the protests have backed things off. They're switching off how they're doing.
Yeah.
But I'm saying it's got to be protests. It's got to be the voting. It's got to be the midterms. And I think y'all are going to be shocked at the turnout in the midterms.
Oh, yeah.
But it's got to be economic. We got to find some common ground. We've got to drop these idiotic divisions and come together, because this is a force, and it's going to take a force to stop this. Because while they're in office, you're right, there's very little you could do with getting them out of office till that election time comes, except the things that you can do.
Except the things you can do.
My example is always Trayvon Martin. I kept saying to people, stop attacking the courts. Go after Skittles, not all the whole case, just Skittles. Do you have any idea what the economic factor of a major boycott of that one candy will do? And if you want to know what it can do, go read about the Montgomery bus boycott.
Yeah.
Martin Luther King, the riots did not end back at a bus. The Montgomery bus boycotts did. And when that was over, back of the bus ended overnight because they almost put that company out of business. We got to attack on all fronts. We've got to.
That's right.
We've got to come together. I wish I had a pulpit and a bullhorn. We've got to.
I
agree. Feminists have a racial problem. I agree. Some progressive places have a problem.
Yep.
But first, identify our monsters. Second, identify our traitors and stop playing the games. They're traitors. No more playing. I don't care if they come with one issue. I don't care how good Bill Maher used to be.
Come on. That's it, man.
That's it. It's over. This is no longer. I'm sorry, people. This is war. Get over it. No more. This is no more namby-pamby. No more intellectualizing. These fascists are.
They're playing for keeps. They are playing for keeps, and we don't. And Umar, man, thanks so much for the call, man. They are playing for keeps, and we don't have time to play games. To play games with them, we don't. And I like what you say. You can't do. You could only do what you can do, and while we can't put Marco Rubio out of office for 6 years, unless he does something that he can be impeached over, but that's a different question. But even though we can't put him out for 6 years, we most certainly can put unprecedented pressure on him and everyone else. We may not have the money to fund a primary against Joe Manchin and to properly fund all of the other primaries all the other fights that we need to fight in terms of an election. But we sure as hell can start putting pressure on Joe Manchin. Right, it doesn't have to be an all or none proposition in our approach towards these politicians, and I love what you said also. And I'll just reiterate: you do have a platform, you do have a loudspeaker, and I'll be your loudspeaker. But we have to do economic pressure as well. All the above: march, protest, call, send letters, write letters to the editor, go out and boycott. Hit their, if you had a problem with a politician in Massachusetts, who would you organize a boycott around? Let me think about that. Dunkin' Donuts. Dunkin' Donuts is headquartered here, and they're on every single corner, 3 or 4 corners of every single street in Massachusetts. So if you wanted to target the politicians in Massachusetts, go after one of their biggest corporate donors, Dunkin' Donuts. And it doesn't take much to research that. You know where city you're from. You know where you're from. You know who the big corporate person is there, corporation is there. Go after them. And it's going to require organization. It's going to require unprecedented levels of volunteerism. Yeah. But if there's ever a time, it's now. Let's take one more caller. Caller, you're live on the air. What is your name, comment, and or question?
Hey, Ben, it's me, Jared from Downingtown, PA. How you doing?
I'm doing great, Jared. Good to hear from you, man. What's on your mind?
I want to agree with what Umar said. I want to point out when he was bringing up the rise and fall of the Third Reich, that right before Hitler banned all political parties in Nazi Germany, which was in July of 1933. There was a case, a trial for the people who burned the Reichstag fire. I mean, the alleged Reichstag fire that was allegedly done by communists. And the judge in the trial actually did something courageous and acquitted all of the defendants except for what was his name? The one who was, I think, mentally handicapped. The guy that the essay gave him.
You're asking the wrong one. I know history. I know my history, but I don't know it that detailed. So I can't help you on that one. But go ahead. What you were making a bigger point though.
But where was I? Oh yes. It actually infuriated the Nazis so much that they actually had to set up special Nazi judges for treason cases because of that the ruling by the judge, how courageous it was, and to a certain extent, I kind of feel like this trial with Trump and the judges, we're kind of almost. It's so eerie how similar it is now, because now we have Trump, railing against these judges, these activist judges with the Muslim ban and all that stuff.
Yeah.
And I'm getting scared. I mean, I know we. What's this? Like, I think progressives. I think we really have to start rethinking our attitudes towards guns under Trump. I mean, if you're trans or black and you're not like at least strapping a gun at this point, like.
I don't disagree with that,
like
Jared.
In Trump's America.
Jared, I have to hold it there only because of time. I don't disagree with you. I actually like that sentiment. They always talk about good guys with guns. Well, we need some good guys to have some guns, to say the least. I have to hold it there, though. Okay, so one last, two more stories. This story really shows you the type of America that Donald Trump prefers. And I'm laying this story at the feet of Donald Trump because of his abdication of his responsibility to protect Americans from all types of terrorism, not just radical Islamic terrorism, but white nationalistic terrorism. And this today in Kansas City, a 50-year-old man who shot at 3 men, killed one. And actually, I'm sorry, this happened last night. He shot at 3 men, killed one because he thought that they were Arabs. Adam Puritan, there's a guy on your screen who was a Navy veteran, shot at a bar, shot at 3 people. The third person that got involved was trying to stop him. The third individual got shot in the hand, but he did kill one of the individuals. They were employees of aviation systems engineering team at Garmin, and the individual that was shot and killed was an engineer there. Both of them were Indian. 2 of the 3 were Indian. Witnesses said that they overheard him saying, "Get out of my country," just before shooting them because he thought that they were Middle Eastern. 5 hours later, this terrorist, Adam Puritan, turns up at a bar looking for a place to hide, tells the bartender that he just shot 2 Arabs and that he had killed 2 Arabs, and the bartender called the police and he has been arrested. This is according to kansascity.com. This is the America that happens, that is created. Well, let me make a correction. This has always been America. We've just tried to make progress against this, but it has always been here underlying. So I don't want to make give you any kind of misconception that this is brand new in America, because it's not brand new in America. But what is brand new is that we have a president who says that this type of terrorism does not warrant focus from the federal government. We need to focus on Islamic terrorism. White nationalistic, racist terrorism, meh. We don't have to investigate that. What we have to investigate is the type of terrorism that you are least likely to be a victim of here in the United States. You are more likely to be a victim of white nationalistic terrorism or just a mass shooting by some deranged, well, I don't even want to use that word there because a lot of times they know exactly what the hell they're doing. But never mind, don't focus on that. And that's just one side of it. The other side of it is this notion that this is Trump's America and the emboldenment that comes with it. And I said this during the primaries and the general election. Yes, this has always been America. Yes, it has. Yes, this racism has always been here. Yes, it has. But Donald Trump has emboldened these bigots to the point where fools jump up to get smacked down. They're jumping up. They are being more assertive because they feel like this is their heyday. They feel like they can come back from the dregs of society. They don't have to be ashamed to be a bigot anymore. They don't have to be ashamed to be a part of the Klan anymore. They don't have to be ashamed to use racial slurs anymore because this is, quote unquote, Trump's America. So the question is, Mr. President, when are you going to address white terrorism, white nationalistic terrorism in the United States? Because it is a real threat. It is a deadly threat. People are dying, and yet you have said nothing. Nothing. Last but not least, my favorite person of the day. Pope Francis. Pope Francis has, listen, I know, I always start with my caveats. I know the Catholic Church is problematic as hell. Can everybody say amen that the Catholic Church has some serious problems? But man, I'm starting to like Pope Francis more and more and more. I mean, if you have to have religious people interfering with your life, at least have a religious person who actually looks out for the small person, the least among us, the most marginalized. And Pope Francis, at the behest of his bishops, his cardinals, of other leadership in the Catholic Church, at the behest of evangelicals, of people who really, religious zealots who literally hate this Pope. He's come out with some statements that are amazing. He was saying today that it was, and this was in his daily homily during his daily mass. He said that he suggested that it's better to be an atheist than a hypocritical Catholic. Now, for the atheists in my audience, they might not see this as a compliment. I get it. But you have to understand how piercing, how this cuts to the core of religious bigots, like religious zealots. I mean, this is not turning the other cheek. Pope Francis literally just smacked the hell out of him. And I want to give you his exact words because, as translated, obviously, and I'll put it up on your screen. He said, there are those who say, I am very Catholic. I always go to mass. I belong to this and that association. And this is according to Vatican radio transcript. He said that some of the people should also say, my life is not Christian. I do not pay my employees proper salaries. I exploit people. I do dirty business, I launder money, and I lead a double life. There are many Catholics who are like this, and they cause scandal. How many times have we all heard people say, if that person is a Catholic, it is better to be an atheist? Hear, 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 hear. Now, again, in context, It's not a compliment to the atheist community. I'll give you that. But in context of the reality of dealing with religious bigots, it clearly cuts to the core of the issue. You use religion as an excuse to oppress other not other, because Christians are not marginalized in the United States whatsoever in the United States. But you use religion as a means of oppressing marginalized groups. And then you completely neglect the fact that you are completely devoid of any sense of what and who Jesus was on social issues, on economic issues. All you focus on is your perception of sexual morality, but pay no attention to the oppression that you're causing your quote unquote brother. And so what is the point of your faith? What is the point of your religion? If all your religion does is allow you to oppress somebody else and for you to have a sense of moral superiority because, oh, I'm a Catholic, oh, I'm a Christian, I'm evangelical, and I go to church. Yeah, but you live a life and you treat people in the most disgusting way imaginable. You may as well not even, just because you do a disservice. You clearly do a disservice. And actually, I think this is what the Pope is saying. The Pope is saying you're doing such a disservice to your religion because other people look at you and say, if that's what it takes to be a Christian, I don't want any parts of it. And so not only do you do damage to the community at large because you're hurting the most marginalized people in society, you're even hurting your own religion. But the Pope was not done. He's been on a couple of tweet storms. He said on the 18th, how often in the Bible the Lord asks us to welcome migrants and foreigners, reminding us that we too are foreigners. Pope subtweeting Donald Trump. He went on to say, the throwaway culture is not of Jesus. The other is my brother, beyond every barrier of nationality, social extraction, or religion. He went on to say Jesus entrusted Peter with the keys to open the entrance to the kingdom of heaven and not to close it. Subtweeting Donald Trump in regards to the gate and the wall that he wants to build. And last but not least, do not underestimate the value of example, for it is more powerful than 1,000 words, 1,000 likes, retweets, or YouTube videos. I will say this. The Pope is, this is actually very brave of the Pope, because he's going against the grain of so many rabidly zealotous religious leaders in his own organization. These statements that we can kind of just pass over and not really pay attention to. These statements are causing an uproar in the religious circles, and quite right. I mean, it needs to happen. It needs to happen because we are living in an America where religious zealotry is being used to oppress people all over again. I mean, if they had their way, they would carry out a crusade against Islam. They would, because they feel like it's their religious requirement. They, if they had their way, they would have Sharia law in the United States. It would just be based on Judeo-Christian values. They want a theocracy here in the United States. They want to make illegal anything that does not conform to their interpretation of the Bible. They don't care. They pay no attention to all the things in the Bible that actually underscore a more progressive society. They don't care about the fact that Jesus threw the bankers out of the temple because they made the temple the den of thieves. They don't care about that. They want to make Jesus a gun-toting, gay-hating, capitalism-loving Republican. And this is the type of America that they want. And so to see the de facto leader, he's not the leader of Protestants, obviously, clearly, an entire generation of wars were fought over that. But he is still almost like the de facto voice for Christianity in the United States of America, willing to challenge hierarchies of religious zealotry, because he has a more loving view of the world because of his faith. Is something that I would salute on my show, and I hope that you would salute as well. Have a good night.
The Benjamin Dixon Dixon Show is only possible with listener support. Go to www.thebenjamindixonshow.com to register for our blog, join the Progressive Army, and support The Benjamin Dixon Show.
It's Ben Dixon!
If you like this episode, be sure to share, like, and subscribe.
Consider becoming a Patreon. Go to www.patreon.com/The BPD Show and support The Benjamin Dixon Show.